this is a trip for me. I live in Ventura, California, so I don't know if you know that. It's a little bit down the coast and you never go there. That's fine. That's great. You look down on us, it's fine. We're okay with it. I have 3 daughters, so fellas, you can pray for me. That's a lot of estrogen in my house, so just pray a lot for me. I have a 20-year-old daughter that's a 3rd year at GCU in Phoenix, Grand Canyon University in Phoenix. I have a 17-year-old daughter named Bryce that's a senior in high school. And I have a 14-year-old daughter named Tyler that's a freshman in high school. So yes, they're boy names. My oldest one's named Hayden. That's all right. I'm their dad. You just have to get over that. This has been crazy for me. So I love this church. I'm honored to be the lead pastor of Mission Church in Ventura. I'm like biased towards this church. I love this church. I love everything about it. I love the people that are a part of it. Sean and Jayla were at my wife and I's wedding back in the day, we go back. That's when Sean was like driving an orange pickup truck. I'm not even as a joke. He picked it out and thought, this is cool, and I'll drive that. So you can just talk to him about that. It's real. It existed. I saw it. I was there when his kids were born, which is a trip for me. I'm also thinking through moving to Ventura and planting Mission Church in Ventura, and we were like we all had kids. There's 3 couples. We had kids, and we didn't know anyone else in town except for each other. And we started looking like, who could help us with our kids? We've got these rugrats that are everywhere, and we need to have stuff to do during the day. And so one of our couples found on babysitter.com this really cool girl named Lily that we were like, well, she looks nice. Maybe she can be trustworthy and watch our kids. And I'm walking in today, and she's leading worship right here. That's a trip for me. So I was like, what's up? Oh my gosh. And so, and there's been people that, have been on staff or led and been in ministry with. I've done weddings in this room. So it's a trip for me to be here. I'm honored to be here. I love everything about this church, and don't give up, man. Go for it, man. God has got great stuff. It's the best possible way to live. We exist as a church to help people find and follow Jesus. That's what we go after together. We're not trying to overcomplicate it. That's who we're trying to be. And we just think it's the best way to live, that God is who he says he is and will do everything that he promised to do. That he sent his son Jesus into the mess to rescue and save, and not because we're perfect, but because he is, and he made a way for us to be made right with him. And that means there's hope for every single one of us, not just the ones that are trying to put on the good face and got the Graham life going on, but for those of us that are down in the mess, at our worst, God sent his best to make a way for us to be made right. That's good. That's good news for us that are moral fallops in the room, which means everyone. So in fact, one of the things we do at Mission is like this, so you'll just get used to this. You don't know me, I don't know you, it's gonna be all right. You'll be fine. I want you to turn to the people next to you and just go I just want you to look at them straight in the eye with kind eyes and just say, I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I know this about you. You're not perfect. So just go ahead and turn to the people next to you. Just if you know you just met, it's all right. Just say, I want you to look. And they're going to get offended. They're going to bow up. They're going to be like, how did you know, sucker? Well, you're not perfect either. Yeah, so some of you are enjoying that way too much. Don't enjoy that too much. So that's the wrong part behind it. This is terrible to do later when you're trying to figure out what to do for dinner, or when you are in a real fight and you want to remind each other of your imperfectness. That is a terrible thing to do. Don't do it then. But it's a great thing to do as we're the church together. To remind ourselves that there is no perfect people, but there's a God who rescues and saves. And that's the hope that we have in Jesus. So I'm going to walk through one of my favorite stories in the Bible today. If I had one chapter that you would have to read for the rest of your life so that we would understand the God that I wish you knew, it would be Luke 15. And it would be the God that Jesus knows and the God that Jesus reveals to us. So there are all kinds of people in this world, so we'll have a little bit of fun. There are introverts and extroverts. Introverts, where you at? Exactly. Extroverts, where you at? I knew there'd be that. That's where we got. All right. There are haves and have-nots. There are do-gooders and do-badders. There are people who surf, and there's everyone else. And so there's also these kind of people, and this will be fun. Just take a quick poll. Are you a spender or a saver? So just go ahead and turn to the people next to you. Spender, saver, what do you got? And just for fun, usually God puts them together in a relationship just to watch the fun happen, right? There's spontaneous and there's planners. If you need to know exactly which turns you're taking, you're the MapQuest of the relationship, then that's a problem. Oh, sorry. MapQuest, kids, was a thing that we used to have to use. Never mind. All right. If you're a rule keeper or a rule breaker, I turn to the people next to you. Which one are you? If you're Article 5, Section A, I'm not going to play the game until I know the rules. And if some of us are rules are suggestions, we'll see if it makes sense, we'll do it. There's those of us that get lost, and those of us who hate getting lost. Anyone know? No, so I am a get lost person. Like the GPS in me was fine when I was a kid, but the GPA in me was fine as a kid, but the GPS was broke. It just broke somewhere. So often when I'm like hanging out with Jody, that's my wife, and we're like going somewhere, I have to remind her, like, I didn't get lost on purpose. Like I wasn't like driving today and be like, you know what's gonna be awesome? Get the girls in the car, like let's just go for a drive, not know where we're going, and waste 3 hours and get all ticked off at each other on the way there. That was not the goal when I set out. I don't know when I got lost. I don't know where I got lost. If I knew all that stuff, we wouldn't be lost. So I didn't do it on purpose, and I'm not trying to do it, but what we're trying to, so that's maybe just helpful. It feels really cathartic to get that out. For me, I'm very spontaneous. I'm very much a spender. I'm very much more on the wild side. Rules are suggestions, and I get lost all the time. That's me. But the story we find ourselves in today, and the story that Jesus tells, one of the stories that Jesus tells in Luke 15 is it has all kinds of people in it. It's got the people that are the rule breakers and the rule keepers, and it's got a God who loves them both. And so Jesus tells this story so that we can know what God is like. So we can know the God that he knows. Because most of us have a picture in our mind when it comes to God that may be a little bit jacked up. And that's why we've been in this series to say, man, there's a God that I wish you knew. And what I would just beg for you is that there's a God in Luke 15 that Jesus is revealing of exactly who he knows God to be, and is telling everybody else who it is. So let me just set the stage for you. It's one of the best chapters in the Bible. In fact, Charles Dickens would call it the best story or the greatest story that's ever been told by anyone, and Jesus tells it about God. And so let me set the stage. We've got these super people that were like nothing like Jesus. Like they were like tax collectors, which if you work for the IRS, that's great. We're not mad at you about that. But in the Bible, that was like the worst of the worst, because the tax collectors of that time were like connected to the empire that invaded them, and they could tax as much as they want as long as they paid off what Rome was owed. So if Rome was owed $10, they could tax $20 and pocket the rest. Everyone hated the tax collectors because they had partnered with the enemy to overthrow them, and they were getting rich off of the people. So it's not just the IRS is like, it's not that. It's just that how they were positioning themselves with the people that were against God and profiting off of the people of God. So that's, everyone hated the tax collectors. So, but all these people that were nothing like Jesus were around Jesus. Like God was skin on. You would think God was skin on everybody to be bolting. You're like, he's going to be really mad at me. Or like God was skin on us here. Everybody looked busy, But all the people that were nothing like Jesus, notorious sinners and tax collectors, it says, were all around Jesus. Because what I'm reading and what I read, what's so compelling about Jesus is that the people that were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And he seemed to, this is crazy, he seemed to like them. So you've got all these people that were nothing like him hanging around him because he was so winsome and compelling, and he was so kind and generous, and he was so truthful. I mean, it just like the way to live is like Jesus. And then you've got this religious crew, like hyper-religious crew, rule keeper people in the back, like watching all this go down. So let me set it up for you. It's Luke 15, 1-3 says this. Now, the tax collectors and sinners, I don't know why there's air quotes there, but there's air quotes there. So it's in the Bible. I don't know. We're all gathering around to hear him, but the Pharisees, that's the hyper-religious rule keepers that thought that they were the closest to God because they knew the most about God. You know any of those people? Sorry. No. So they're hanging out in the back, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." That was the most scandalous thing that they could say about God with skin on. This guy hangs out with people that are nothing like him. I mean, if he knew us, we are the closest to God in the room. If Jesus was here, he should be hanging out with us because we keep all the rules. But this guy hangs out with people who are nothing like him, the notorious sinners. If he knew who they were, he would keep a 10-foot distance from them. So who is this story for? Jesus is telling this story that we're getting ready to walk through with the people that are nothing like him right in front, and the religious people who can't quite figure out what he's doing in the back. So this story is for everybody. He's going to tell us what God is like, the God that I wish you knew, for everybody. For the embezzling, corrupt businessman, for the self-righteous church leader, for frat boys and girls gone wild, for the kid that grew up in Sunday school and knows all the right answers, for the addict, for the prostitute, for the guy who memorized scripture before he could talk, for the illiterate, for the uneducated, for the PhD, for the seminary prof, for broke college students, there are no other kind, for exotic dancers, people struggling with depressions, for used car salesmen, truckers, celebrities, rednecks, teachers, factory workers, stockbrokers, and stay-at-home moms, domestic engineers, for single parents, orphans, widows, firemen, and farmers, artists, hairdressers, and politicians. Like Jesus told this story for every single one of us so that we would know what God is like. Because we get so messed up on who we think God is. So if you're alive and sucking air in the room today, then Jesus told this story for us. And then it goes like this, 15:11, there's actually 3 stories he tells. I'm skipping to the end when it's the best chapter. Go read it. It's fascinating. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. So we got 2 sons, and basically what's going on culturally, you can kind of tell, like, man, you would be offended if your son wished you were dead and just wanted the money from you, right? But even what's going on deeper in this world is like, it's like an offense, like he's leaving the family. He would get, like the father would have every right. The people that are listening to him and the religious leaders in the back would have assumed that when the son says this to the father, that it's going to be a fight. He's going to dismiss him from the family. He's not going to give him the share of his estate, and he's going to kick him out, not only of the family, but of the town and of the community that's a part of, because that was the most offensive thing that you could do to a dad. And so everybody that's listening, the people that are right around Jesus and the religious leaders in the back, I know how this story ends. And it's not good for the son. What I'm learning about the younger son, and maybe you know this, is that he was around the father and had probably even obeyed the father. But all he wanted from the father was his stuff and the benefit and the blessing that came with the last name. He didn't want anything to do with the relationship. And so when he thought he could get what he wanted from God or from the Father, he wants the bull. So the youngest son's request would have been so offensive, and they would expect to be just basically the father saying, you're dead to me, cut off from the family, cut off from everything. But that's not what the father does in the story, which would be the picture of God. He just says he divides up his estate in front of him, and it is everyone would be shocked that the father would do this. In fact, this story is famously called the story of the prodigal son. But really what it actually is the story of the prodigal father. So prodigal just means extravagant, outrageous. And so what's more extravagant than what this younger son chooses to do is the reaction from the father. It's way more extravagant and way more outrageous. And so not long after that, in verse 13, and I've always wondered, how long did it take? The younger kid, right? He's like, I got this plan. I'm going to get my money and I'm going to get out of town. Was it 45 minutes? The estate gets divided up, he gets his check, and he's gone. Was it 4 days? Was it a month and a half? In my mind, it's quick. He's getting me out of here. I'm never going to see this gate again. I've got this brilliant plan of how it's going to go, and I can fund it. Game on. Give me my freedom. Let's go. Not long after that, the son got together all he had, and he set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. I don't know if I need to explain what that means to you, that he squandered his wealth, and I'm just kidding. But if you've been there, we'd be like, I got freedom. He's listening to Tom Petty with the windows down, cruising down. He's for the first time in his life, he doesn't have curfew. For the first time in his life, he doesn't have his overbearing parents in his mind around. He can do whatever, however, whenever he wants. And man, it was amazing for him when he could fund it and do whatever he wants. But I don't know if you've been there. When the nights run into mornings, and the parties are great as long as you can fund it and sustain it, and the friendships seem to be real until they're plastic and fake and nobody cares for you in the real. Or you're trying to fill this bucket of your life, but you're living in such a wild way, in such a way that's doing yourself harm, that you can never quite get it filled. And living this way is always you're dumping more stuff into it, but it always is draining you out because it's not the life that we were meant to live. I don't know if you've ever been there. You had no accountability, no life, just doing whatever he wants in a train wreck. And says verse 14, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he became to be in need. He's blown it royally. Literally. He has given everything. He spent everything. He was funding everything, and the friendships were great as long as he could pay for it. And what he thought he wanted, I don't know if you've been there, the experiences, the clothes, the drinks, the cars, the crazy nights, the daytime fog between parties. What he thought he wanted, that this is the best possible life for me, so I'm out with my family. What he thought he wanted did nothing for him when he was in need. Because they always needed more. Wild living didn't fulfill, didn't satisfy, didn't meet his need. It just left him empty. You been there? You're I know I have my freedom, and I'm just going to go after it and forget what anybody else says. Forget what you say, God. I'm just going to live this way. And it's really great for a season. And sometimes that season's really short. And what you think you want, you get. And then you realize it does nothing for you when your soul is actually in me. Been there? So verse 15 says it this way. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And like the crowd would have not been able to understand this. Like, wait. So this is like a primarily Jewish crowd right here. We got the people that are nothing like Jesus right here, and they got the religious people right here. And neither one of them, no good Jewish boy, no bad Jewish boy hangs out with pigs. Like it's like an unclean animal. You got to go back to the Old Testament. We can walk through that and do that later. But basically, everyone in the audience would have been like, what? No, that's about as bad as you can get. He longed to fill his stomach. It gets worse. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. You been there? When you feel like you're just at it, and like you used to have these friends that were around you and everything was like when you were doing what they wanted, and now that you're not doing what they want, it seems like you're alone in the mess and you don't know where to go for help. You ever been there? That's where this young kid is. Said he had run about as far and as fast as away from his father and his father's house and his father's way as he possibly could. It doesn't get any like rock bottom worse for this kid. And then I think what he realizes is that self-deception plus self-reliance equals self-destruction. Or as my friends in AA or in recovery would say it, man, insanity is keeping on doing the same things over and over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Have you been there? One of the questions that Jesus asked in another part of the Bible that I love is he asked like, well, do you want to get well? And I used to think like, that's a dumb question, Jesus. I didn't grow up in church, so I'm like, I read the Bible sometimes like, that's stupid. Like, am I allowed to say that? Am I going to get in trouble when I get into heaven? Like, like it feels like a dumb question. But then I've realized the longer I've been living and the longer I've been wrestling through things and the longer I've been a pastor, I realize it's the best question ever. Because we got to realize if we want to get well, we'll have a story to tell, but it matters. Like I can't want you to get well for you more than you want to get well. And so Jesus would ask people all the time, do you want to get well? Do you want to stay here? And so this little dude, like that just ruined everything, has a come to his senses moment. The next 6 words in this story are huge in this story. Verse 17, when he came to his senses. When you track them back through your story, and I wouldn't pretend to know where you walked in or what you're navigating or what you believe about God, Jesus, Bible, church, Christians, I understand that. Christians are weird. I know, and if you don't know a weird Christian, you are one. So it's all right. This is a safe place for everyone. But have you had that moment when you've been at the low of the low and God has helped you come to your senses? That's what happens to this kid. When he comes to his senses, he's thinking back of what life was like with his father and said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. So the runaways or the younger brothers in the room, I don't know. I wouldn't pretend to know your story or what you're running from, whether it's a wife or a husband or a kids or a job or a dad or a family or pain or responsibility or running from your past or maybe even running from yourself. I don't know what you're running from, but when he had his come to his senses moment, it was important that this kid could have blamed every single person else. And what I'm learning is that it's impossible to blame my way to freedom. Impossible. He could have blamed his parents, his upbringing, his sheltered life, his genetic predisposition to party, his belief system, his church, the pig farmer that wouldn't give him anything, the guys that bailed up when he didn't have enough. He could have blamed everyone else, but he's realizing, I have done this, I have ruined this, I need help, I am coming to my senses, and people in my father's house have it better than me. What am I doing here? So he makes a plan. Verse 18, he starts like making this comeback plan on his own. He says, I'm going to set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So we got up and went to his father. And I love this because he's like, writing a speech. He's trying to clean up. He's like walking back to his father's house. And he's like, okay, I've got my speech in my back pocket. I'm rehearsing it. You can just, in my mind, he's like, make sure you get it right. I've sinned against heaven and against you. He's like, I got this speech. I got to make sure I nail this point because I want my dad to hear this. And it's not just that I've wronged him, but I've sinned against God that he knows and against him. Like I'm the one, I'm taking ownership. I did this. Not just a mistake, but I've broken the relationship intentionally. I've sinned against heaven and against you. That's part 1. Okay, I got that memorized. Part 2 is I'm not worthy to be called your son. I'm the one who severed the relationship with you. I know that I am dead to you. But here's my idea. Part 3. Will you take me back as a servant? I know I can't come into the house. I know I'm not part of the family, but can I have a job? I know I'm not doing Christmas and Easter at the table. I know I'm going to live in the bunkhouse where all the servants eat. I just need a job. I know I'm never going to be your son, but can I be your worker? I know I'm never going to be invited to the table, but can I be invited back into like the property? And he has this speech, and there's this other turn in the story because this kid's walking down the street with his speech in his back pocket, and he is bracing for impact of his father, and the story turns again. It's like Luke 15:20. You can hear the music change. It says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and is filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, and he threw his arms around him and kissed him. I'm sure there's a lot of really graceful runners in the room. I'm sure when you run, you look, it's amazing. But in my mind, this is not a graceful run. This is like an old man run. You know, like in old men, no one of importance ran back in the day. So the dad in this story everyone listening would have known he'd had to pull up that robe, and he would have like really gross knees, and he would have like this gangly, awkward, just old man run. And if you're old in here, I am too, it's okay. It's all right. We don't run pretty. But he's running to this guy, and if you're the picture of the young son that's coming home, and the last thing you saw from your dad is that you basically told him, I wish you were dead to me, and the old man is running towards you, and you don't know what kind of look is on his face. And so you're probably bracing for impact in the moment. Like, is he going to drive me back out? Am I allowed to be here? He's preparing for blows. He's preparing for everything because he doesn't know what kind of father he's going to get when he's coming down the road. But I know that he was amazed by the grace that his father showed. Because you got that old man crying and snot going on, and there's this whole mixture, and he all that's happening. This son that he thought was dead, this son that has basically train wrecked his life, this son that smells like pig slop, this son that is starving and probably emaciated, this son that has lived a wild life has come back home, and he didn't know what father he was going to get, but he was really surprised by the grace of his father's embrace in that moment. And I love that picture. This is the story that Jesus tells us about what God is like. That picture right there of a father who runs to lost and broken and runaway kids. He braces himself for impact. And then the son, through all that mess, there's crying and snot and all that stuff right there. So it's going on, and they're pulling away because the son has got a speech in his back pocket that he really wants to get to. He's really messed up and surprised in this moment. So he says, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I got through my points. I got to get this out. But then the father interrupts. I love this because God interrupts in our way of coming back to him all the time. He's like, you don't need your speech. I'm the dad here. You don't get to tell me that you come back on your terms. Let me interrupt the speech because this is what God is like. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Go research what all those means. It's amazing. I don't have time. Do your historical research. It's so cool what the Father is doing right there and what Jesus is saying. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. Let's throw some parties. This is round 2 of a God I wish you knew. He throws parties for lost sons that come home. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. I love it that God butts into the plan. Because the son had been planning on coming back on his terms. But the father had a better plan. The son had been thinking about the speech, but the father had been thinking about the party. The son's been thinking about what to say, but the father's been thinking about what to eat. The son's been thinking about going to work, but the father's been looking forward to his son to come back home. And I love everything that this says about the God that Jesus knows. And Jesus tells this story because he wants us to know what God is like. Broken, lost, rebellious, runaways. He welcomes back with open arms, with no pretense of what they bring for him, other than themselves. And Jesus is telling this story with people around him. I feel like the angels just sung there. It's amazing. And Jesus is telling this story with people around him right here that are as lost as all get out and rebellious and moral foul-ups. And he's going this is what it's like when you come back home. Because that's who God is like. And he's also got a watching religious right crew back there that is so annoyed at these people that they would have a chance to know the God that they think that they know. And they miss it that Jesus is right in front of them. God with skin on, saying, I'm going to pay the price to make it right so that you can come back home. And I know all the type A entrepreneur, that people in the room are looking for the loophole in relationship with God, but this is grace and this is the loophole. Like there's no other plan besides the price of Jesus for our lives to be restored back to Him. And grace changes everything. It sets our story apart. It cleans up our past. It makes our presence full and makes sense, and then reconnects us with God and gives us a future hope that this world is not all there get. For the believer, this is as close to hell as you will ever get on this world. And you may be going through it because life isn't always up and to the right. But grace sets us apart and sets us free and gives us hope. The message isn't that God is good and you are bad, so try harder. The message isn't that God is holy and you're a mess, so figure your own way out. No, God specializes in making dead people alive again. One of my favorite verses in all the Bible is that 2 Corinthians 5:21. It says, God made Him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in Him we might become the righteousness of God. So for the runaways and younger brothers in the room, there's hope for us. And it starts with coming back home to the Father that Jesus knows God as. And you watch as He throws a party over one person that comes back home more than 99 people who don't need to repent. I wouldn't pretend to know all of the stories or all the hideouts that we have, or all the hurts or habits or hang-ups that we got going on. But I do know that in Jesus there's hope for every single one of us. I want to pray. God, you're good, and you're great, and you're kind. And I'm just so thankful for Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy before Him, which is us, we're His joy, that's crazy, but for the joy before Him laid down His life so that lost sons and daughters like us can make a way home. God, that's what defines us, that's what establishes us, that's what connects us, and that's why we worship, because we don't deserve it, but we get it and receive it.